Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Lori Lorig with Faith Unleashed Consulting. The work that I do is around the idea of how do we engage more people in ministry. And so I work to help you create a stewardship system within your congregation to engage people based on their gifts and their talents, and then creating a sustainable system, which is ongoing, that will last. I've been blessed by the work of Pastor Elton Stroh over the course of many years. I'm at Trinity Lutheran Church in Crete, Illinois. Elton has been here twice to help us, but we were part of parish assistances programs before that. So strategic planning has been a huge part of the blessing in my life. And so as we step into this morning, I'm just going to kind of turn it over to Elton and say, Pastor Stroh, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about how Crossroads came to be?
Absolutely. And Lori, thank you for the opportunity to have these answer your questions today, and welcome aboard to all those who logged in and are part of the audience here. Well, I was born in California, Northern California, raised on a farm in North Dakota, educated in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. I served as a parish pastor for 24 years under God. With his blessing, started a mission congregation around Kansas City, Missouri, led a large turnaround congregation in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I was privileged to design and launch Crossroads after WELS Parish Assistance was defunded as a result of a major financial synodical crisis at that time. I was the director of WELS Parish Assistance, so launching Crossroads made a lot of sense to me. I already knew what I was doing, how to do this, and so forth. And I felt that very much this process was needed, comprehensive ministry planning, because many of our congregations, after parish assistance was defunded, still needed that kind of assistance.
Elton, can you tell us just a little bit about how many congregations you've worked with over the years?
Sure. Parish assistance served almost 500 congregations. I think the number was 480. I've served since launching Crossroads in July of 2000, well over 200 congregations. So I guess I've served a lot of churches. Many were served more than once as well. And Trinity there at Crete would be a good example of that. As you mentioned, parish assistance twice, Crossroads now twice. So we're currently in our fourth comprehensive ministry planning process.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Elton. And we've really become a church that values that and intentionalizes that. And that's what's really helped us gain momentum. And bringing in an outside consultant has been part of the blessing for us that has allowed us to keep moving in that direction. Because often our pastors have enough on their plate, but you come in and you just keep us moving, which is really an amazing part of this. So just for our benefit, how would you define or explain strategic planning to someone who has never experienced it before?
Strategic planning might be described as the process of documenting and establishing a direction for your church by assessing both where you are today and where under God you hope to go. My Crossroads strategic planning process includes 4 phases: exploration, deep dive analysis, mission vision setting, and implementation. I'll add, a healthy strategic planning process is relational, or at least it's best when it's relational. It's helpful if there's mutual respect and trust among the consultants, the pastor or pastors involved, elected leaders, and other active members.
Awesome. So I often explain what I do as I'm kind of like, if you had a business that had 100, 150 people or more, you would likely have an HR department or someone that helped manage the human resources. And, my goal is always to help get the right person serving in the right place at the right time and for the right reason. And Elton, I've heard it said that you and the work that you do is kind of like a generalist or a family practitioner, that the work that you do takes a general overall look at the health of a congregation and helps them to see areas that they might have issues in. Can you give me some examples of why churches actually come to you?
Sure. Maybe both for the generalist approach, that's the comprehensive planning approach that I use, and then also for specific services or specialized services, I get both requests. With the comprehensive planning process, Crossroads examines and analyzes both the physical and spiritual status of a congregation, prescribes or offers actions to consider, and then follows through with periodic checkup. Um, in way of specialized services, Crossroads provides designing annual ministry planning events, developing multi-site ministries, coaching or mentoring, usually on an informal basis, organizing staff for maximum effectiveness, leadership development, team building, organizational realignment. That's something Trinity is going to be looking at here. Once there's clarity on vision where we're planning to go. Also assisting with conflict management, that comes up occasionally as well. Those are examples of some of the specialized services. Along the way, I believe throughout all these years that I've been able to serve my Lord in this capacity, I think we've probably helped some pastors stay in ministry. I think we've maybe been able, under God again, to save some marriages, and we've witnessed the Lord working in many other incredible ways as well.
Yeah, thanks, Pastor Stroh. So many of those things we've experienced personally at Trinity, where you've come in and helped us. And your expertise with having served so many congregations, you've seen what works in different places. And that's really been a blessing too. I've come to you and asked you, hey, can you tell me where you see, this church flourishing in this area of adult discipleship or that as an example. And you often pass people on to me, which I very much appreciate, with the time and talent stewardship. So that idea that you're kind of the generalist, and then you can help steer congregations to places where they need additional assistance, I think is really valuable. Yeah. Just wondering if you can give us just a little bit of insight. Some people might say, hey, this is God's church, his plan. We should let God determine, the direction of our church. Does he actually say anything about strategic planning, Pastor?
Nothing, not a word. No, I'm just kidding. Proverbs 15:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Psalm 20, may he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. Proverbs 16, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plan. So scripture obviously speaks about planning in favorable ways. The Apostle Paul planned his missionary journeys, and he always was open to changing his plans as the Lord guided him and opened new doors. And so are we. When we establish a plan, we understand that this could change in the coming years, depending on circumstances, what the Lord is providing. Of course, the Lord is the master planner, isn't he? He planned our salvation. Isaiah 28, 29, I think it is. All this comes from the Lord Almighty, whose plan is wonderful, whose wisdom is magnificent. Strategic planning is not only a biblical concept, I think it's a biblical mandate. It's making our best effort to establish how you and your congregation intend to carry out the Great Commission. Just repeat last year, I don't think is a very wise way to do ministry. We need to be intentional, focused, enthusiastic about reaching and teaching as many people as possible in whatever ministry setting we're in.
Thanks for that, Pastor. I think your point there about just repeating what we did last year is really important. And so as we start to think about, in your opinion, why should a congregation go through that strategic process? Just give us some examples for that, would you? Why you think it's important?
Sure. Why is planning important? Because churches that plan well and repeatedly, and that's important, are usually healthier. They tend to be more focused on what matters to God, more faithful in seeking His will, typically more blessed. I used to tell congregations about 15 years ago or so that they should go through a comprehensive ministry planning every 7 or 8 years. That seemed to work pretty well, generally speaking. Now, because of the pace of change, I've been telling congregations every 3 to 5 years because, globally, nationally, and in our local communities, change is happening really quickly, primarily because of technology, demographics, and so forth. And generally speaking, the best approach is go through a comprehensive ministry planning process because that gets you focused and gives you energy. And then refresh your ministry plan annually. That's huge because otherwise it gets dated and you put it on the shelf. And thirdly, when you start to lose focus and energy, that typically means it's time for another comprehensive planning process.
So I appreciate what you said, Pastor Stroh. Just that idea of how often are you updating this? Some congregations may have been part of a strategic planning process years ago, and they think, okay, one and done, we did this, and we got to this point, and so not a whole lot's happening. That probably means that they're ready for another go around, right?
Oh, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about some visible indicators that a congregation might need to do some more strategic planning? I just mentioned that, we might not be gaining any momentum, but other things that you can see that are keeping people from moving forward.
How much time do you have? There are a lot. There are so many. Again, a lack of focus and energy, frustration, apathy. You'll see indicators like decline in membership and worship attendance, struggling to find people who are willing to serve in leadership roles and in other ways within the congregation. Oftentimes programs are declining, or you see some programs disappearing. Oftentimes there are budget issues. Sometimes there's conflict, blaming each other for what's either happening or not happening. And the list goes on.
So maybe you can just give us a little bit of insight today about some of the significant trends that you may be seeing in congregations, and particularly WELS congregations that you've been working with.
Sure. In the WELS, we've been in decline since 1990, as most church bodies have, not necessarily beginning that year, but church bodies are mostly in decline these days. So here in the WELS, we've continued to close some churches. Some churches have merged. We've also seen some congregations develop multi-site ministries as well. The congregations I'm working with are all, at least I'm trying to help them, all try to figure out how better to do ministry in the 21st century within their specific context. That looks different from one location to the next because churches often have unique ministry challenges and opportunities, and what works in one location with one church isn't necessarily a good fit for another congregation to try to take on that same ministry program or whatever, because they're so different. But of course, there's always hope. I became even more convinced of this when I conducted research on turnaround churches in the WELS. So I believe wholeheartedly that declining churches can live and even thrive again, with God's blessing, of course.
So let's talk about the types of challenges that strategic planning can address. Maybe you can narrow those down a little bit more for us.
Well, sure. Basically, everything that churches struggle with, I try to assist them with. So it's kind of like a you name it. I'm going to try to help the church address it. Sometimes they'll build a team of consultants who are specialists in an area in order to address a specific need. We always want to do things in every area of ministry that the Lord seems likely to bless.
So recently, you were at Trinity, and we were blessed to have you take us through the strategic planning process. I would just like to throw in this little bit because I think that this is important to understand is that when you come in, Pastor Stroh, you call it like you see it, which is really helpful. But you are so full of grace.
Oh, okay. Thank you for adding that.
Yes. Well, I absolutely. You are so full of grace that you help us see the positive, but you don't. You can say things that other people sometimes in their own church can't say. And certainly when you bring in other consultants with you, that also allows them to say things that maybe other people won't say. And I just think that that's a tremendous blessing, to have that outside set of eyes that can see those things that maybe you didn't see. Just as an example, somebody mentioned the bottleneck issue at church in our results. The pastor is standing in the wrong spot, and it was such an easy fix that we could make as a congregation, and yet none of us thought of it. So I just throw that out there to say, Pastor Stroh, you have such an amazing ability to come in and just help people see things that maybe they haven't seen before. So can you just give us some more insight into helping congregations to address the challenges brought on by COVID? Can you tell us a little bit about how, you're staying current in that aspect and really helping us work through the processes?
Sure. Yeah, COVID hit everybody kind of hard. Well, especially churches, I suppose, because they're gatherings of people on a regular basis. Initially, Synod provided some useful guidelines and resources to help congregations. I suspect they're still out there. Crossroads assists with analyzing a congregation situation, and then we offer actions to consider. At this point, I would recommend that all congregations affected by COVID, and that's, I guess, all congregations, that it would be good for them to develop a 1 to 3 year plan for recovering from the effects of COVID. And in some situations, congregations are going to be coming back much more quickly, as a few of our attendees here mentioned they're almost back to normal attendance. In other cases, we don't know yet, and overall, just what's going to be the impact of COVID, how many of those regular attenders in the past are actually going to remain regular attenders going forward. Some of the stuff I've read is suggesting that we're going to lose about 20%. Going to be about a 20% decrease in overall worship attendance going forward. So all churches are dealing with COVID. There's some good useful resources floating around out there beyond the WELS. For example, Growing the Post-Pandemic Church by Bob Weitzel is one example. Recently, I saw something by Mike Bonham, who also wrote a great book on metrics in the church. I highly recommend that. But he put out an article on post-pandemic digital worship strategies. So if you Google, and search for that kind of stuff, it's out there. You can always pick up an idea or two from those resources.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, that decline in worship attendance and the need to be digital, I think it's also important for us to think about now that the field is ripe also for outreach. And
Sure.
If we don't have good outreach systems in place, that's something maybe we also want to consider is how are we going to be more effective in that piece?
Yeah. And with the outreach aspect, outreach is all about relationships. And that's so important to kind of start there with that question. How are we going to build meaningful relationships with the people that we're going to try to reach? And people are kind of shaken by COVID, and those are kind of opportune moments, take advantage of the crisis kind of mentality where, is the Lord giving us an opportunity to do some specialized ministry because of this event or this happening or this, whatever the crisis might be.
Yeah, I think for us that's always one of those challenges is how do we build those relationships? I think the statistics in America today say that the average person has less than 2 close friends, and that society is craving meaningful relationships. And I think as you watch us look at the iGen and all of these things that are surrounded around the individual. Church can provide meaningful relationships, first and foremost with our Savior, right? But also with other people in our congregations. And I think that that's something that's unique to the church has that we don't find in other places in society. So we're actually going to do another series on systems in the church, and we're going to talk with Dave Malnus about his process for building relationships and sharing Jesus with people in the community. And that's coming up next month. So that's a little plug in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, and that's something that's I also recommend Dave's services in congregations from time to time. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So, and just, I think that that's one of the areas, as you talked about in the WELS, the consistent decline, just that idea that if we want to continue to grow our church body as a whole, and share Jesus with people, we got to get active now and not wait till later.
Yeah.
So,
and the emphasis needs to be first on growing the kingdom, first on bringing more people into the family of God. And actually, if we have that as our highest priority, it kind of comes naturally then. That mindset just kind of puts you into action at a local level and at your congregation in wanting to reach people locally. If the most important thing is adding people to the kingdom through the means of grace, the powerful working of the Holy Spirit through word and sacrament, if that's where we start, then the rest kind of happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that I've learned working with churches for so long is that we get to a place where we get comfortable in serving each other and one another and the people that we've already reached, so that we lose sight of that great commission to go and make disciples of all nations. And so how do we do that effectively? And so just as you mentioned, Pastor, we let that mandate to go and make disciples become, we'll let them come to us. And that's not what Jesus said. He said, go, right? And so how are you building that strategy in? And that's another place where Pastor Stroh can help. So I'm just going to ask you to spend some time on explaining your process to us, because your process is unique to the WELS. And I think that it just serves congregations so well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using you multiple times. I'll just say that. So can you explain your process for us, Pastor Stroh?
Yeah, the process is similar because I was directing WELS parish assistants, which was also a 4-phase process. When I saw that ministry coming to an end and realized that there was still so much need for that kind of process in the WELS, which is why I launched Crossroads. I sat down pretty much with a blank piece of paper and said, what worked really well in WELS parish assistance? What was somewhat questionable because there were different responses to different steps in the phases or whatever the case may be. And that's how I basically ended up designing Crossroads. And I've expanded Crossroads in some ways. I'm, serving area Lutheran high schools and some ministries, other ministries within the WELS. And so it's not just comprehensive ministry planning process that's happening. But with that process, that comprehensive process, it's designed to be, I often say, a frame bending process. It's intended to influence how people think, how they feel, and ultimately how they function as followers of Christ and members of their congregation. Phase 1, the exploration phase. Phase 2, the analysis phase. Phase 3, mission vision setting. And phase 4, implementation. During the first phase, the exploration phase, we just want to get acquainted. We just want to meet each other, talk with each other. I spend some time listening to the leaders talk to me about their congregation, what's working, what's not working, what are their frustrations, what are their hopes and dreams, just so I know where they're at. I ask them a series of questions, and then I also give them additional information about Crossroads. Also, usually during that same phase, or pretty much always during that same phase, I conduct a foundation laying seminar, lays a conceptual and biblical foundation for ministry planning in the 21st century. So those two steps, meeting with the leaders and then that foundation laying seminar, comprises the exploration phase. That puts the congregation in a much better spot. It gives them adequate information so that they can make a good decision on whether or not to engage Crossroads. If they do, after they receive and approve a project proposal, then we go on with phase two, in which we identify strengths on which to build, significant issues that must be addressed, things that are holding the congregation back. We evaluate all areas of ministry, both commending when possible, and also offering actions to consider as deemed appropriate. This is the deep dive analysis. We don't like blind spots. and so I've got analytical as my number one strength on Strength Finder or Clifton Strength. So Lori knows where I'm coming from with that. I like the details, and oftentimes it's in the details that you find some of the big stuff. During the mission vision setting phase, that's phase three, we assist the congregation in formulating a clearly articulated, compelling, and agreed to ministry plan with longer and shorter term goals. And then during the implementation phase, we share vital concepts and tools for advancing ministry, and we then walk with the congregation during the first full year of working their plan. So we're not just in and out. We walk with the congregation to assist them along the way. Crossroads also helps with designing and conducting annual events, annual retreats, rather, I should say, at which we evaluate the past year, see what goals were accomplished, and if some were not, ask why not, and so forth. And then we also update the ministry plan, so it keeps providing focus and energy. And I don't know if I can emphasize that enough. Ministry planning is cyclical. You need to go through the whole process from time to time to help you stay focused and to give you energy again. But then on an annual basis, you've got to keep the plan fresh. Otherwise, it only serves you for a year or two, and then you start ignoring it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Pastor. So one of the things when I was on staff at Trinity as the member ministry coordinator, I worked as part of the that equipping process to organize our annual board retreat and ministry event. Right. And so we would have a Friday night orientation for new board members coming on that would explain their roles, their responsibilities, would share a ministry position description with them, would provide them with a board manual and also a flash drive, now Google, or shared drive kind of information. Mm-hmm. But then on that Saturday, we intentionalized our planning process, and the key elements that you laid out for us, or with us, I should say, in that strategic planning, gets in front of the congregation on an annual basis. And we get to see, here were our goals for this last year. And then the boards that owned each of those, they report on how effective they were in accomplishing those goals or not accomplishing those goals. So that builds in a level of accountability, which is, one of those things that I often see missing in our churches. But then those goals actually get carried over onto all of our board planning documents. So those goals stay in front of people. And it's just a means of intentionalizing the process and building in that system. And I don't think we as a congregation would have gotten there without you, Pastor Stroh. So I just, if you guys haven't figured this out, I'm a fan. I'm a big fan.
Feelings are mutual. By the way, Lori, if I can insert something here, you mentioned the word accountability, and man, that's huge. In any leadership groups need to have, 5 dysfunctions of a team, that comes into play there. But one of the big elements there is accountability, and some of the concepts and tools that we use, especially during phase 4, come from a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And one of his sayings is, we need to live in a 90-day world. And by that, he means there are specific accomplishments every quarter. They're identified in advance. There is a person, not a group of people, but a person who owns always a specific goal and reports regularly on progress. And so that's where some of the metrics and so forth come into play. And it just generally, in a respectful way, holds everybody accountable, and the whole team and the congregation as a whole becomes much more productive. And that's one of the benefits of strategic planning and building in to that process, that accountability factor, because just more ministry happens, and it's often better ministry.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I learned in all of those processes was, when you're leaving a meeting, who's going to do what by when? Let's get some of these details hashed out and made sure that they're clear. And so often that simple piece is something that we don't end our meetings with clarity of what needs to be accomplished. So again, awesome. Pastor, talk to us a little bit about who are the people that you involve in the strategic planning process and how maybe your process is a little bit different because of that.
That's one of the reasons I think that the comprehensive planning process is most beneficial versus the shorter term ones. The people that are involved are the consultant or the consultants, depending on the size of the congregation, whether they have a school ministry, the pastor or pastors, staff minister, principal, and faculty if there's a school, other whatever called workers there are in a congregation, they're engaged. The elected leaders, of course, and then this is important, as many other members as possible. We want member involvement in this process, and there are several touch points designed just for that reason, because we need members' insight. We need their ownership of the ministry plan, and then we also need their participation in helping to accomplish those ministry goals. And sometimes we need their support in financial areas as well. So if you can build momentum, bring more and more people into the process, better things happen as a result of that.
So that leads us to that idea of, so how do you build alignment or agreement among people? And do we need alignment?
Well, alignment is always good. and that's why the Crossroads approach is a ministry planning process. Again, I keep saying process because it's as far as I'm concerned, it's so helpful, so useful. It's designed to grow momentum and to grow the ownership rather than simply an event. And when there's just an event, it typically involves just the elected leaders. And so this ministry plan is kind of hatched in a vacuum. People don't know about it. They haven't been a part of it. And so from on high, so to speak, the plan is shared and people are wondering, where'd that come from? Nobody asked me, and that kind of thing. It ends up being the result. So the goal is to have all the arrows, all the points, the people really pointed in the same direction, to have everyone working together and moving forward toward the same desired destination. That's the goal. That's why alignment is so important.
Well, I'll tell you another benefit I saw through the process, and multiple times, as you start to listen to your congregation and people start to tell you things, you see new leaders bubble up out of this vision planning process. And we know that leaders are often a challenge in our congregation, but you see people that speak up and start to get excited and passionate about it. And then that's, I want to be careful how I say this, but that's new, fresh blood, right? It's fresh ideas and somebody that's going to bring energy to your congregation and provide new opportunities. So I think the buy-in piece has been huge.
Yeah.
Pastor,
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to, you mentioned, how the process differs. I think one of the points there is that it's comprehensive, it's thorough. And it engages members at multiple points. And I mentioned before, I don't like blind spots. I don't want to miss anything important. And out of it all, we want clarity, we want ownership, And as much as possible, we want passion. We want passion for ministry to grow.
Absolutely. So can you just talk a little bit about how your process looks different than others?
Well, and because it's comprehensive, of course, generally, in terms of how long it is, some of the ministry planning processes out there are like a weekend, and I do that too. I can do a weekend event if that's what a congregation wants. We can do planning just with the leaders. I've done that any number of times over the years. But most important, I think, taking the process approach. My approach takes about one and a half to 2 years, and that includes the first full year of implementation. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the getting acquainted, the deep dive analysis, and the actual formation of the ministry plan all happens in less than a year, typically around 7, 8, 9, 10 months, depending on circumstances, when summer comes and what we skip over and that kind of thing, holidays, whatnot. And then in phase 4, we walk with the congregation. I walk with the congregation as a lead consultant through their first full year of implementation again, which adds another year to what was already done in those first phases.
Yeah. So are there some significant results that you can point to that have been brought about because of strategic planning?
Well, there are so many in different settings. Congregations might start new programs as a result of going through a ministry planning process. They might add to staff. They might expand their facilities. There have been some relocations. Oftentimes Bible study increases because more opportunities are provided. They often grow their worship attendance, enhance their outreach efforts, I should say. Maybe they launch an early childhood ministry. That happened just recently within the past year with one of the congregations I'm serving, and more. Trinity would be a good example. As I was coming in to do a deep dive analysis recently there, I looked back at some past ministry efforts and was able to identify that one ministry planning process led to a facility expansion. That I think was your first one. And then there was the development of a personal member ministry program, and then technology enhancement. Yeah, that was Lori. That was Lori launching that. And then technology enhancement was a result of another effort, another ministry plan, addition of several part-time staff people. So you've got some paid part-time people who are leading and driving some areas of ministry. Outreach comes to mind there, and likely other blessings from the Lord. So you never really know how the Lord is going to bless the effort. And a lot of it depends on the partnership between the consultant or consultants and the leaders, the pastor especially, and what local circumstances are involved. But they vary a lot.
Yeah, I just want to go back, and we've touched on Trinity, which is, of course, my home church. But the reality is you've done this with like 700 churches, right, Elton?
Well, I'm not sure what I've never really counted them all. So.
Okay, but a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Yep,
Yeah.
a lot.
So I just love that you're willing to tell us about Trinity, but there's been so many other congregations that have been blessed in this way, and that's what you continue to do. So if someone was interested in proposing this idea of strategic planning to their church leadership, how would you suggest that they go about it, particularly if they're not a pastor, or maybe if they're a lay leader that's joining us today?
Sure. Yeah. Usually what happens is that I get a phone call or an email. More often than not, it's either a pastor or an elected leader, but occasionally it is someone who's just in the congregation. They heard about Crossroads and they're wondering if maybe their congregation could benefit from our services. First thing we do is we just talk about your situation. What can you tell me? And then we determine at that level, in that first conversation, what a possible next step might be. If it's not the pastor or an elected leader, maybe it's having a conversation, with the pastor, maybe with that person, in a Zoom or whatever. We always want the pastor to be in favor of moving forward. In fact, truth be told, if I have a strong sense that the pastor is not willing to have us come in and to go through this process, I won't go, because it just doesn't work. We absolutely must have the pastor on board. He's the primary owner and driver. Otherwise, the ministry planning process won't unfold as intended, and we won't see the blessings that we would like to see. Sometimes we schedule a Zoom session to include others in the next discussion. That usually results in my coming on site to talk with the elected leaders, and then conduct that foundation laying seminar we were talking about before for all members in the congregation. And when we've been doing that, especially during this year of COVID, things slowed down a lot during this year, obviously because of what happened in churches. But we were able to keep some things moving, and then oftentimes the congregation streamed things. I would come in and meet with a smaller group of people. I did that at Trinity, and then you streamed it out to the rest of the congregation so that they could also participate.
Awesome. So why should people hire a consultant and not just attempt to do this themselves, in your mind, Pastor?
Well, great question. There have been a few churches with their leaders, their pastors, who have been doing stellar ministry planning all on their own. They really haven't had the need to use whether it was parish assistants or Crossroads or whatever. Although I think that's the exception. I think many have tried and their efforts have stalled out or failed, which causes a lot of frustration. Then when the subject of planning is brought up again, it's like negative. The reaction is negative because of their first or second attempt or whatever didn't work out as they were intending. There's just something about bringing someone in from the outside and then paying for those services that helps people better own and support the process, support the effort. Plus, you get the informed experience, the input of the consultants who have not only served in their own church or churches, but also have, I often use people who I've used numerous times before. A good example of that would be Jim Siebert, the former director of the Commission on Lutheran Schools. So whenever there's a Lutheran elementary school involved, I'll use someone like him as an associate who specializes with that particular in that particular area of ministry. On the Crossroads website, you'll find a document titled "Benefits of Strategic Planning," which I believe will give you other good reasons for bringing in a consultant.
Thanks, Pastor Stroh, for sharing this insight with us. And I just want to make sure that we share contact information for Pastor Stroh. You can reach Elton at elton.stroh@timeforcrossroads.com. And you see his phone number there if you'd like to reach him. And then my contact information should also be on your screen. Lori Lorig with Faith Unleashed Consulting.